How you doing, guys? Welcome to the Behind the DM Screen panel. I'm Grim. I'm going to be doing a little bit of host. I'm trying to get everyone to synergize and have a really fun conversation. We've got a fantastic panel of DMs and creative peoples.
GMs.
Lore keepers. So let's start at the end. Let's go for Maura. Maura, could you introduce yourself and tell us one DM or GM or lore keeper or creative person, prop or item or life hack that you couldn't do without?
In relation to games.
In relation to
Okay. I'm just wondering.
Let's see where the conversation goes.
Yeah. Okay. So my name is Maura. I grew up here in Galway County, though I was born in the States, and I'm a writer. I write science fiction, horror, fantasy across genre, across media. So I do a bit of comics, 2000 AD. I've written a bit of games, a bit of theatre, film, radio. Lots of different things, prose as well. And when it comes to games, actually I have to say, because of COVID and everything, I started using, for D&D, I started using Beyond D&D. And man, I have to say, it is really great. It kept our party together anyway during that period. But it's obviously, it's only for D&D, it's not for other games. But we also use Roll20. And so I have to say all these new technologies actually kept our group and our friends together during a really tough time. So I'm very pleased for them. Cool. Yep.
Next on our line, we have one of the local club members, Aoibhe. Sorry, Aoibhe?
Aoibhe.
Oh, I did get it right.
Yeah, perfect.
Never doubt yourself. That's the #1 mistake. Aoibhe, can you introduce yourself and tell us one of your props, tools, life hacks, something you can't do without?
My name is Aoibhe. I'm a member of Athenry Adventurers, and I've been playing D&D for 3 years now. I feel a little underqualified.
I don't think so.
But
different perspective.
yes, exactly. The one thing I definitely couldn't live without is a session 0 when starting out a campaign. I think it's fundamental. I think everybody should do it, especially if it's going to be a longer campaign, to get used to your characters and to build the world with your players.
Nice, fantastic. Thank you very much. Next up we have Doug Kaufman. Doug is a fabulous game designer type person. You might have heard of one or two of the things he's made. Doug, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us something that you couldn't live without?
Sure. I'm Doug, and I've been a game designer for well nigh on to 40 years. I got my start in the industry doing role-playing games, writing rule systems and adventures. So that's my cred here. What I couldn't do without is this voice, because all my villains end up having this voice, even if I didn't mean for them to when they started. This is how it ends up, so yeah, can't do without it.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Neil Byrne. Neil Byrne is a creator of tabletop RPGs and is a very creative dude as well. Neil, could you introduce yourself and please tell us what you couldn't live without? What's your thing?
Well, I've been working on tabletop games for a good few years now. I made a few little games, and I've got a big one that I'm hoping to publish next year, which I've been working on for a while. And the one thing that I could not do without is spreadsheets. Absolutely. They are the best way to store your notes. And I have lots of notes, so spreadsheets.
Fantastic.
What about yourself, Brian? Come on.
Sorry?
What about you?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
He doesn't know who he is.
This is all about you guys.
No. It's just wondering what would be
what's a
one
DM thing I couldn't do without? Lying.
So true.
Dice are there for the pretty noises they make.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right. So now I think we've broken the ice. I have a couple of suggestions. So I don't know if we should we go? Let's let the audience pick, actually. Should we go, hands up, who wants to see it go maybe in a more managing your players and player engagement, or into physically sort of creating a game? So hands up, who would like to see questions on player engagement? Okay, that's a very engaging question, that's appropriate. And sort of behind the scenes, building. Okay. Okay. So we'll ask a couple for that, and we'll ask. So we're more narratively focused here. That's fantastic. That works for me. So let's say, okay, here's a really tough one. I'm going to throw this out. If anyone can answer this, how do you, as someone who's running a game, manage the difference between player agency and allowing sort of a compelling narrative to develop, where you've got a plan that you want to create something, but you want to give freedom at the same time? Anyone keen to jump on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would always think that narrative wins, right? So when you're with your players and they've taken your ball of wax and now they are melting it and they are using a catapult to put it out a window that you didn't even know was in that room, right? You have to go with it. So weirdly, even players have to think on their feet a lot, but as a DM, you have to think on your feet and you have to ask yourself, well, there are some people who might say, well, no, this is my world and I've designed this, all these hours I put into it. And what is the point of the game? The point of the game is to have fun. That's the most important thing. And if players start to feel like they're being corralled and they're being, not allowed to express themselves as madly as they want to, then they're not having fun. And then you're into ego and you're into this is my world, my rules, and I want things done this way. So I always expect all my plans will be destroyed by my players. I mean, it's the number one rule. They will not do what you expect. So you have to roll with it. And then there are times, there are ways you can control narrative as well, and prevarication, and then maybe having, when players start prevaricating, then you need to put the hammer down, usually. That's when you can start sneakily, you can sneakily do some things behind the screen, and then that will get stuff going in. So basically, it's about having fun. And it should be you as a DM as well, or GM, sorry. It should be about having fun. And that's the number one rule I follow. Are my players having fun? Am I kind of annoyed? Then probably it's a good evening. And also not every evening is going to be brilliant, sometimes a bit up and down. Anyway.
I see a lot of nodding there, Doug. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I want to add two things. One, I'm giving a talk tomorrow, Sunday at 12, so come back, about how I write role-playing adventures, and it does address partly that point. But one of the things I'll say then, in more detail, is that if you have a regular group, you know they have warm hands and that things in the room will start to appear. So you can start to hear and know this combat is not going to happen. I've designed this combat, I've put on all the stats, I know the monster, but it's just not going to happen because she will always try to negotiate. And once you know that will happen, think about what happens when the negotiation starts. Like you can actually start to anticipate. If you're running people you don't know, much harder, but if you know your group, there's ways to kind of roll with the flow and even write ahead of time some of the things that will happen.
Now, that obviously bears the question, what do you do when the players do the totally unexpected? You prepare that they're going to talk things through.
No plan
and then they start
the enemy.
Exactly. Such a great line.
Any advice or thoughts around when the players go, throw you a hard left?
Well, I mean, and it ties in the first bit for me is like that there's always consequences. Like, I will let my players do whatever they want. I mean, it must be reasonable. It can't be something, like if they say, well, I want to do this crazy thing, I say, sure, tell me how. And actually, they hate it when I say that. They'd much rather I said no than say, tell me how you do that, because now they have to come up with a sensible, logical way to explain this crazy idea that they've had. But then on top of that, there is the consequences. Okay, you've done that thing, something's going to happen. There will be a consequence, good or bad. And those consequences, I find, often hook your players back into the narrative that you've been writing that you're trying to tell as well, which is, it's wonderful when something happens in the game, your players do something crazy, and then something terrible happens to them. and you're able to say, well, that's because you did this.
I
It
warned you.
wasn't my fault. This was your fault for doing this thing.
Well done.
And they can't say anything about it because it's true. Yeah. So.
Ava, do you have any experiences around this?
Well, I definitely think there's a point to let them do what they want, but I don't think there's anything wrong, especially if you're a new DM, having an end point. Like, you have a goal that you're going to get to. It doesn't matter whether you don't have to railroad them in one specific direction, but all roads lead to Rome. So if they decide to start a bar fight, they're going to the King's to be put in jail. If they do something brilliant, they're going to the King's. If they do something, doesn't matter what they're doing, they're going to end up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great
yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
All right. So let me ask you this. All right, this is the meaty stuff. So I think a big thing is immersion. It's making the players feel like they're part of that world. I often feel that helps curtail some of the more crazy stuff. If they care about the person getting hurt or whatever, then suddenly they behave themselves a little bit better. So how do we foster immersion in our players?
Well, I think a good thing, if you're in person, now it depends, like if you're doing a one-off game down here, it's a very different setup for immersion. It's kind of difficult, actually. So you want to go to the races really quickly with the game where it's a one-off game and you're not going to see these characters again, But if you're talking about immersion with regular players, one of the things I would recommend is you kind of agree to a structure, which is no phones, we're going to do a session for 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever time you think is reasonable. You're going to say, in this time, let's agree, and obviously you want to say this in nice terms rather than, you will not bring in your phone, we will agree that we're going to have fun and do this session by this time, and maybe have a break halfway through or whatever. Because what can easily happen is somebody is talking about some other question, they pick up some other player picks up their phone and they start looking at things, and it kind of, everything sort of dwindles, the heat of the situation dwindles down. So there's certain things you can agree to about how you're going to conduct your session. And I think you get all of that out in your very first meeting together. And then, also, so the reason I stress that is that it's kind of like this closed environment you want. The more you keep the players together, the more they're interacting with each other, the less distraction. And then you can think about things like the cool music, God, I've seen some people's their games dungeons, where they have incredible setups with they might have screens with maps and interactive and dry ice, some people have insane environments, but to me it's the main thing is containment. We're all here and this is what we're doing right now, and then it's very easy to sneak in like strange noises, creaking, sound design can be great in a game, and there's all sorts of apps and things you can get for that as well. But so anyway, that would be, but I think it's really important to get those decisions are made early with your group that you plan to game with for a while.
Well, that very much ties in, I'm going to go on a total tangent now, but that very much ties into what Aoibhe was saying about the session zero. Does everyone here know what a session zero is? Is that thumbs up because you don't know? I think, hands up if anyone doesn't know.
I don't know.
No idea. Aoibhe, would you mind explaining what a session zero is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Session zero is before the start of a campaign or any TTRPG session where you come together with your players, and normally it's when you do character creation as well. So you have your players that are going to build characters that fit into your world and that fit into the story, because as the DM, you want to be able to tie in what they're saying. You want to be able to add aspects from their backstory into the story if you can. And I think it really helps decide whether or not you're going to be doing Lord of the Rings or maybe something a little goofier, but
yeah.
And then it'll go goofier anyway, but you'll deal with it anyway. Yeah.
Oh, because just talking about the session zero and going back to your thing of immersion is so important, because you're creating a game, you've got your setting, your world that you want to play in, and you've got your players, and it's like, yeah, let's make fun characters, but they need to make sense in the world that you're playing in. And if you've got somebody who creates some character that's completely nothing at all like the world,
The 13th Warrior.
it completely can mess up your, like I know in a campaign I used to be running, so my main game, Fae Earth, it's an alternate 19th century Earth where it's full of Fae. So it's set in a 19th century Europe, and we were playing, and I invited a friend, so we're going to be playing, I'm looking for a new player, would you like to join? Yes. I was like, this is set in Western Europe. It was set in Ireland in the 1840s, okay? Everybody's characters, they're humans, they're all based in Europe. Some of them might have Fae bloods, but their Fae ancestors are going to be from European folklore, and they made a character who was part Kitsune from Japan.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, fine. So that's a big part. The other another couple of really simple things for me is, and it's such a really simple thing, whenever you were referring to in session in the game, and you're referring to your players, referring to them by their character's name.
Yeah.
It's such a tiny little thing, but actually makes such a massive difference when I always will, if I'm referring to my player by their name, then they immediately know, okay, we've stepped out of character now. This is Neil talking to Neve, and it's useful for IC, OC kind of frame of reference, but it's a tiny little thing of just always referring to your character by their name. And then I'm not very musical. I don't use sound effects or any of that stuff in my games, and because 99% of minis are for pseudo-European, pseudo-medieval settings, that stuff doesn't really work for me, so I don't use VTTs that much either, but when I am describing the scene as well, the use of descriptive language, of just, you're not just describing the room is this big, it's 4 meters by 5 meters, it's like, what does it smell like? You're on a busy street. What sounds do you hear from the traffic outside? Those little things in your description, especially if you're someone like me who I don't do accents because I'm not a voice actor and I can never remember what accent each of my NPCs had, so they all just sound like me. And I'm not, and I the one or two times that I've tried to use music and sound effects, I end up spending so much time worrying about that I forget to run the game. So it's just like using simple descriptive words, descriptive language really will pull them in. And you can see the players when you can see they're picturing it in their head. They're getting into the scene just by simple things like describing the smell of the room, the sounds of the environment, those really, really simple things outside of the basics of, I'd say, 5 meter by 4 meter room with a table here, and it's like, no. That really, really helps with the immersion.
Bringing in the other senses. Cool.
I think one thing I would add is I'm thinking through kind of little bits that I think of in terms of immersion, and I think playing to your own strengths as a GM is the tying theme of it all. Because if I do voices, even though they all end up sounding like this, at least the characters are now differentiated from my voice as a GM and the players' voices. So that's one thing. I also think there are some systems out there. It helps if you're running D&D 5e to also look at other game systems. You may never run them, but somewhere that clever person who got this thing published had one or two really good ideas that you can steal and add to your campaign, and often they have to do with, I see 5e, it does all these mechanical things, great. I want to add this thing, which often are immersive type systems. There's a system that nobody plays anymore where there are subplots that are weaved into your adventure, and you kind of make sure that you weave one of these in, and then the characters trigger them along the way, and so they become part of that subplot, and you're ready for that. So put that into your system, but you need to read and look at these other games in order to kind of have a good toolkit, if that's one of your strengths as well, is just perusing rules and kind of culling out interesting things. So those are some just a couple little things.
Yeah, and know your characters' backstories. Most of them have, some can give you like a book of their backstories, but trigger them out when they're not expecting it. You know, sometimes they write these things, they go, oh, I've got this terrible enemy, you know, from this one. And we're like, nice, thank you. Let me make a note of all of these things. And you don't tell them when they're going to just turn up. So in an event where they think it's all this one thing, then you can lob that grenade. So this is where you get your revenge on them for throwing grenades at you, you know. So I mean, knowing the backstory of your characters and putting parts of that into is great. And if you could tie that into an event or a color or a sound, or there's all these other things you can do with that backstory. You know, you could have someone who's got a phobia. One of the games, you know, we mentioned, isn't it Call of Cthulhu has a whole thing where you start generating phobias, you know? Yeah. So that's a really great, oh my God, it's such a lever if you're a GM, if someone's got a phobia or they've got something they love to brag about, or there's all these little elements that you can constantly be dipping into. So it's good to have a list of them nearby, and when you're working out your campaign, you can think, well, I'm going to take one element from each of my characters and put that into this campaign and see what happens.
Actually, I have a mechanic in my system, Fayearth. It's a simple little mechanic to do with crits, but whenever somebody lands a crit against one of my players, okay, they cause a critical injury, that causes a permanent scar. And we have there's an injury mechanic table as well, so you roll, well, where did the critical injury land on the body part, and it causes a permanent scar. Now the player can decide exactly what that scar looks like, but it causes a permanent scar. So as you're playing over time, the players, they're getting scars, which should be happening. You're fighting monsters and getting nearly killed on a regular basis. So then it's great for them, because then they will be describing scenes where they're getting changed or dressed, and they see this scar and it's like, oh, that was from that fight, or that was when this happened. And it's actually how the character that they're playing, how they have physically changed over time as a direct consequence of the story that we're telling. And it's a really simple little mechanic, and it was pure flavor, that's what it's for. But the players really then love being able to talk about, oh, and I got this scar from that time when we were fighting the ogre and he nearly bit my arm off. It's like, oh, and that time when we were fighting and the fairy struck me with a fairy elf shot that burrowed into my arm. And like, they're just like, and it really just, like, because it's something that always, it annoys me if you see things like, say, your critical role type thing, where like, okay, so you fought dragons and gods and your characters are still these beautiful 20-something-year-olds with pristine hair. It's like, no.
One thing you said there about referring to your characters like to their character names is really important when it comes to immersion for me, when you're playing with especially inexperienced players, because you have someone who's never played D&D before, you hand them a sheet and you say, you're now a gnome rogue, go. They don't know what to do. And especially when you're dragging them into that role play, it can take like so much effort. And one thing I find is that you're only going to get what you put in. So if that means doing the awful impressions or a Scottish accent that should be a criminal, it means you have to put as much as you can into it, because they aren't going to respond if you're not giving it effort.
Yeah, I actually really love doing all the voices and stuff, even if they're bad, you know. And the thing is, I guess to what Neil was saying, it's not necessarily the voice, but like if you're playing a bruiser, you know, and you've got your characters there, you just go like this, like you move your body differently depending on the characters you're playing. And if you've got a very prim lady, she's like, yes. You know, I mean, there's all these, and these are simple things, you don't have to add a voice on top of them. But, and also to encourage the characters, again, they're using the name of their characters, but also that they're acting their characters as well. And you can't, you know, stop people if they don't want to be like that, but you can encourage it by your own actions, and they follow your lead. You are the leader, you know, that's what it's a call, and it's a, you know, signal that's coming back and forth, the game of ping pong. So you have to be prepared to play your side of the game. So.
I thought what Aoibhe said about bringing in new players was quite interesting. I'm wondering, Doug, you might have some interesting thoughts on this, because obviously you're a video game guy, and the tutorial level is something that video games have very well, and sort of RPGs don't really have, our tabletop ones. There's not an equivalent that I see readily. Any tips, any thoughts?
Well, I think one thing that just jumps into my mind is, well, first of all, video games hardly ever do tutorials well.
They
but
should.
That's a separate thing. But the thing about role-playing games, the thing that makes it so accessible, is that it kind of sort of doesn't require a tutorial. Now, you can mystify somebody with a character creation, and there's where you want to either maybe give them a template the first time, or do a session 0. Just that is your tutorial, is that session 0 for character creation. But once you start playing, the whole point is supposed to be, okay, if you walked into a bar and some guy bashed into you and said, "Get out of the way, you little..." Get out of the way, you little...
okay,
well, how would you react? That doesn't require a tutorial. That is the tutorial. The game itself is life. So I think it's the mechanical parts that we could use a good tutorial for, and probably the rules writer in terms of how this character creation works. Very simple, very logical. Please explain it to me. I've looked into systems myself and had no idea exactly where I was supposed to start in terms of creating the sheet. But I think that you don't need it so much in terms of the play.
Okay. So you've never had a difficult new player? You lucky man.
Well, I've certainly played with lots of new players, but that's the thing, is I think that they get into the rhythm of the game part as long as they have somehow overcome the mechanical nature of the creation part.
That makes sense.
One way to overcome that, and there is a system I can't remember the name of, that plays into this. You start the game, then you start filling in the character sheet. So you know what you want to be. I'm a bruiser. Okay, that's all I need to know. This thing happens. All right, your strength, put that in as 17, and you go from there. And you can probably do that in a session 0 too, although I've never tried that.
Sounds like fun though.
Yeah.
In my day job, I'm a secondary school teacher, and hard sums and science, and I started a Dungeons and Dragons club in my school, and small club, really great. Kids absolutely love it. My principal loves me for it, because it's like, here's a super inclusive space for all the nerds and weirdos, you know? Yeah. But whenever somebody has come in and they want to join and they want to start and they want to play, so we have to do the character creation, the first thing I'll always ask them is, okay, so tell me about your character, tell me about your person. I'm not mentioning race, I'm not mentioning class at all. It's, who is this person? What are they like? What's their personality? What are their interests? What do they enjoy? What do they hate? I'm only talking about what type of person is this? And then based on that, it'll be a case of, okay, so they sound like they're a bit of a bruiser. Maybe would you like to play a fighter or a barbarian? Or do you want to be a half, or, oh, okay, they're really kind of sneaky, or they're a real kind of scholarly, nerdy, and that, like, we could be talking for a good while, but all we're talking about is what type of person are they? And then from there deciding on a race or lineage, and then a class or a profession. So then when they do start playing, and it's a case of they're not thinking, oh crap, I'm playing a gnome rogue, how do I say, oh, I'm playing this little girl and her name is Elfie, that's what I said, and okay, what did I say about Elfie? Okay, she's a bit of a prankster, okay, she loves pastries. Okay, so what's she gonna? And so they're thinking of it not in terms of the class and the mechanics. They're thinking of it back in, and that then you see the immersion really happen.
I would often tell my players there's no classes in the world. But that does make me think of how people often fall into the alignment chart. And it's like, well, I'm neutral, so I'm staying out of this fight.
Oh yeah.
So, any other sort of pitfalls? Let's maybe go into we've done very positive stuff. Let's look at some of the negatives. Any pitfalls you guys have come across, and how to overcome them for our DMs that are hanging on your every words? Who hasn't gone in a while? Who wants to go? Aoibhe, do you want to go?
Sure. Yay. Well, there is always that when you're planning an encounter, you've got, okay, I've looked at the challenge rating. Don't mean
Lol.
this should be a perfectly balanced, it will go so well, and then you're 2 hits away from TPKing everyone. And that's when you lie. You fudge your rolls and you say, oh, he missed again. And it puts you in an awkward position, because if it's a mistake on your part, you don't want to punish your players because you didn't think through the encounter. And you don't want to go the other way either, when if they're about to take down the enemy that you thought was going to be a boss but wasn't actually effective at all, and they're about to take it down, you don't want to minimize your big bad that easily. So maybe you give him an extra misty step. He runs away. But I don't think there's anything wrong with lying like that.
No. In fact, that, I think, is one of the big pitfalls running a published adventure, especially. I've come across ones, okay, this is balanced for this party, and I have these 4 players, and a single boss against 4 players who all have these different initiatives and spells and actions they can take, they fall so quickly, and the thing is underwhelming, and there's no climactic moment at all. So you really do have to do a bit of fudging for the villains quite often. And so if you're planning an adventure, keeping in mind that numbers times power is really the overall effectiveness of something. And also the silence spell. More often than I can possibly imagine, this person sings to make the monster move, and the monster's huge and powerful, or they cast these powerful spells that will wreck your players, and they have to cleverly do the thing that's up on the wall and solve the puzzle. No, they just cast silence, and then nobody can do anything, and it goes on from there. So always remember the silence spell if you're running D&D.
I actually, in my weekly game that we play, that we stream on Twitch there 2 weeks ago, had my players they were gone, their employers said, go to the docks, there's a really, really important shipment coming from the Fey Nation, get it, bring it back. And they got robbed. And they were robbed by a caster who cast darkness. A very, very simple low-level spell in my system, cast darkness, and then was using a telekinesis spell to lift the crate up out of their cart and pull it over to them. And now the source from the party, she was able to counter, she cast Dispel Magic and broke the darkness. So they saw the guy just before he disappeared, which was great, because they then knew who'd robbed them. But it was like, they were so annoyed that I had completely taken them out with this really simple, really low-level spell. A simple illusory spell that's like not at all powerful, and completely took them out. I had a lot of enjoyment of it.
That's more of a pitfall for the player, not for the DM.
It's like the only thing I enjoy more than that is when you have them fighting a bunch of people who you have basically started, like NPC enemies that you've started, who have their classes and their abilities. Throwing your players' abilities back at them that
the evil party is
against you all the time. It's so much fun to see their reaction when you do to them that thing that they do for every single monster that you throw at them.
Maura, any pitfalls, any worries to work around pitfalls?
Yeah, I mean,
What you got?
like difficult players who will not play the game. It ruins everything for everybody. And I mean, it's a really problem. It's a problem.
So what's the solution?
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things that can happen is the other players start to get really pissed off with them, and they, in a way, they tackle the problem by addressing, or you have to, you might have to ask a person to leave a game, because if they're coming and they're kind of just always causing problems, and they're never. Because there are people in this world, and they just like to stir the pot, but not even in a productive way, And I think I've never had this problem as a GM, but I have been in parties where there was one person who just was like a moaner or a complainer, and the other characters just come to hate them, And I think usually what happens is they kill the game, and everyone reforms another game without them. That's kind of what tends to happen. I hate to bring this up, but it's very, very uncommon. And I mean, you may like the person in some situations, but in this game, you can't deal with them. there's nothing you can do about it.
One of my pet peeves is when they create the super mysterious edgelord character, with their super secret backstory and their super secret side quest stuff that they want to go on, that they refuse to tell anybody about, and they think they're being mysterious. And it's like, no, you're just boring.
Yeah.
Like, we actually stopped caring about your super secret backstory like 3 months ago. Like, we're a party here, share the secret or just shut up, And the one way you can deal with that is the super secret backstory suddenly comes and bites them in the ass. And now, oh shit, that thing that I've been doing that I haven't been telling you about, it's now our problem, and they have to face it. And that can actually end up turning it into a really fun situation, because it forces the player to actually act like a member of the party,
reintegrate,
and they can't fix it on their own, and they need the help of the other players, and it can actually, work out well. Or what can also happen then is, well, once that's dealt with, they then happens in the might say, oh, I'm just going to leave the game now. Work is happening, something's going to happen. The excuses come out, but in reality, it's like, they were suffering from main character syndrome, and they had their main character moment, and now they're done, and everybody tends to be happier as a result.
Yeah.
I think when you have that player, like the loner, the edgelord, who doesn't want to work as a team and is forgetting the fact that they're playing a team game, they want to be playing a video game, and you have to talk to them about the fact that it's not a single player game, and that you're not the only person who's got the backstory, and you're not the only person who's got all that. I think you have to talk to them about character motivations. Like, as in, what does your character want to do? They want to do that super secret stuff, but do they have anything after that? What are they going to do once they get that goal? Because otherwise you're not planning for that future once they actually do achieve that.
And I think it's the thing is that the point you made there, it's so true, is that if you're doing a gaming session, it is a team game. So if you've got all the chaotic evil characters, everyone wants to play a chaotic evil character, they think that's cool, right? Try get a bunch of chaotic evil characters, if you're really playing them that way, to actually work together. And so that's where you just say to people, there's like, at some point, people have to realize, you think it's astoundingly obvious, is you have to come together as a team, and you have to act in a way where you're helping your friends survive dangerous situations. And of course, sometimes you're putting them in those dangerous situations. But again, it's for fun. The whole thing, I have to emphasize, fun with a capital F. We're supposed to be having fun, even when it's terrible sometimes. It'll come out to the fun eventually, But I think at some point, it's like, it's actually a team game. Yeah, I know you're playing a rogue who's like mysterious, and I don't like other people. Immediately in my head, I'm like, why are you here? Like, why? There's a reason why we have adventures together. That's the point. Or else a video game analogy is perfect.
What's in your mind?
Off you go.
There is a sort of similar but counterpoint to that, which is the shy player. Who doesn't want to be part of the group because they are afraid to be part of the group. And in both cases, one thing I've tried with varying degrees of success, and some systems actually try to lean into this more than others, is make sure that somebody is the star this time, or there's an arc that is about their character, because a lot of systems also have all these flaws and backstories, and you can never remember all of them, and they create it at the beginning, and then it never comes up again. But if you look through, somebody mentioned kind of know your characters and pick something that's interesting, you can note this person's never talking. Okay, it's time for their backstory to be the next adventure I plan. And for the next 4 sessions, it's all going to be about them. And they may not even realize it when it begins to happen, but they get into it because now it's something that they created and they're interested in. Same for the person who's the edgelord. They're at some point, give them their moment, but they'll need other players to help them. And then when it's the other player's turn, they can fade into the back and not kind of hog the spotlight or be mean to people. And if they still pursue that, I think then that player is just not for your group. But by letting everybody have some time in the sun, you can help everybody who's either too low or too high reach that middle and become part of the team.
Yeah, that's actually a really hard thing to do over a campaign, is to balance the players, And then, depending on the rules, some characters might be quite powerful quite quickly, and in unexpected ways. You know, I was, funny enough, was playing one of my favorite recent characters was a rogue gnome, and she was insanely powerful quite quickly, because backstab at a certain point gets ridiculous, and nobody could see me because I was super stealthy. But I played her as a very fun, sort of almost hyperactive, jewel-obsessed person, and who was quite cheerful the whole time. So I wasn't interested in like flummoxing other people, but I did want all the jewels. That was very important to me. So, you know, if I had wanted to dominate, I could have, you know, in the game. So that's another thing as a GM to think about, is watching the power levels of your characters, and maybe you need to throw an extra item to someone, you know, and actually doing cool things with items. That I'm a big fan of spells that are used in inventive ways. I absolutely love it when people do that, but including items, people can kind of use them in unusual ways. So.
Right. We have about just a little over 10 minutes. If it's okay with you guys, I might see if anyone in the audience has a question or thought. Hands up. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask? Yes, madam.
Thank you, sir.
Oh my goodness. How professional.
Okay, cool. Okay, so just when you were talking about like pitfalls and stuff, how many players is too many players? Because I was in a game once where we did a one shot, and it felt like especially when we're doing like combat, it felt like, you know, you go out, have a smoke, have a cup of tea, run a marathon, come back, and there'd still be like 2 more people ready to take their turn.
Yeah.
So how many is too many? And also, what's your ideal number of players?
You were talking about students playing, and it reminded me that I introduced, when my kids were younger, to their classmates to D&D, and we had like 9 or 10 kids. So basically what I had to do was, there's a finite amount of time for a round, and you divide it by the number of players. So each kid got about 6 seconds to make their decisions, and if they didn't make it, it was on to the next kid. So it was just rapid fire. What are you gonna do? Okay, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? I shoot the guy. Okay, he shoots the guy. What are you gonna do? All right, back to you. And so I had to pick up the pace, but the number of players was scalable by how quickly they could process that information, and it became part of their characters to a certain extent. So I wouldn't like to do that on a regular basis, but it did work to have like 9 kids at once.
I think it very much depends on the system that you're playing. Something like 5e. Realistically, once you get about 5 players, it becomes difficult, especially for something like combat, just because of the way the mechanics work. But then you've got other systems where I think you can have a bigger group, like say something like Call of Cthulhu. It's a very different system. You could have 6 or 7 players, because let's be honest, in Call of Cthulhu, most of the combat is trying not to die anyway. So you know,
or go insane.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess it does depend. I mean, part of it is the simple little tricks for the GM of always telling the player who's next on the initiative list, you are next, so start thinking now. And if you set that up from day one, and be mean about it. You have to be at the start of like, be mean about it. You're saying like, okay, wait, you've had like 2 minutes to think about this and you haven't come up with something, you've got 60 seconds. Okay, you're frozen in indecision and you lose your turn. Because it's up to the players to keep track of things as well. You know, it's not just up to you as the GM to keep track of things, they have to keep track of things.
I also think it depends on like what experience the players have. You can manage 6 in a 5e D&D campaign if they know what they're doing. But if you've got any more than almost 4 brand new players, you have to explain to them, okay, you roll a d20 to attack. You have to add all of that, and that time will just completely add up if there's more than 4.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I will say that, I mean, that's one thing about, I feel like I'm a shill for this program now, but if you've got a certain program I mentioned before and you press the button, it adds all the other modifiers and things, which really trip up young players, new
And
players.
old players.
And old, yeah. I mean, one of the things I absolutely loved was every time I leveled up a character is like the program would tell me, oh, you've got this thing and that thing. And I'd be like, oh, wow, thank you, program. Because they can be quite detailed, all these extra feats and things that you can get. So yeah, that's one of the advantages to using that. Sorry, what was the other question we were talking about
It
there?
was in general about the characters.
That's it.
Oh, the number.
party.
Yeah, 4 to 5.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I mean, there are very few games I can think of once you go beyond 5. The only other way is, exactly as you were saying, is to have it very fast. So one of the things I do is if characters, maybe they're not in a fight and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, is I just casually roll a dice behind a screen, right? And I'll say nothing to them. I won't look differently. I'll just start rolling dice behind the screen. And they suddenly will be like, whoa, what's going on? What do you mean, what's going on? You're making a decision here in the middle of nowhere on a public street, you know, with a place that's known to be a place where you're going to get robbed. No, fine, off you go. Tick, tick, tick. You know, so I do think if you've got more than 5 or 6, you have to be exactly like that. You have to be, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And know, like, oh, well, I'm not sure what my modifier is. I don't care. What are you doing?
Right.
Are you hitting? Okay, fine. Calculate now. You're next. That sort of pace. Because I think in combat, it's not bullet time, but we are kind of in bullet time because we're collapsing time and stretching it out. But it's not infinite time.
Right.
So you kind of have to, I tend to be quite aggressive on that score when I'm with players, because they also can come up with some really surprising things because they're so scared and surprised, you know. Anyway.
I think for me, 5 is my favorite, and it's for a different practical reason though, is that people can't make game night, you know?
Yeah.
And if
Oh, yes.
2 of my players can't make game night,
No,
there's only
that's it.
4 of us, then I don't want to run the game. But
Yeah.
if the 2 of us can, but 3 can, I'm like, okay, we can still play today.
Yeah.
It's a very simple, and that's why I like 5 players, for that reason, specifically. You're not getting too big, and you can be down 1 or 2 players in a given week, and everybody can still play.
Yeah, I mean, we had a game where we had to, like, you know, that idea of when the players couldn't come, so there's sort of a ghostly presence with the rest of you, you know, and the GM has to play them. And what happened is, you know, she's quite a big barbarian. She got hit, and she lost like, what is it, Martin, 50 years of her life or something. And she turns up the next week. Luckily, she was an elf. And we said, you've lost 50 years of your life. So now the quest is to go and get the restoration spell that was required to get that back, you know. So there's all those kind of interesting things. But that can unfortunately happen. But yeah, so having 4 to 5 with, like, so you can have a spare on a campaign is kind of handy.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Hands up. It's already done.
Has anyone successfully run a heist where the players are actually doing the heist? Because I find it very difficult because one failure can throw off the entire plan.
Yes, but in the system Paranoia, are you familiar with
Oh,
that?
we were just talking about this earlier. It's one of my
Game
favorites.
of humor, and so
Oh,
in
so
that,
brilliant.
if they
Yes.
screw up, you just go with it, right? And
Yeah,
somebody can be vaporized and left
Yeah.
behind, and the new clone can come in. That worked just fine. That was a
Yeah.
great heist. But typically, I'll have to think about that. I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think of the ones I've done. There hasn't been a heist in it, but I've played plenty of heists, and as a player, and I think, you know, usually that's the thing you have to plan, and so the GM is like listening very carefully to your plans, and they're deciding how am I going to react to all of this. And the thing is, there can be choke points. Like, for instance, the game we played earlier is like, if you're going into a castle and trying to save someone and there's armed guards everywhere, that's a problem. You know, that's a really, really tough problem. And often it will be very hard to get your players to even attempt that, you know? So there's a kind of graciousness as the GM that you have to have towards your players, especially if they're really trying hard.
I feel like you're calling me ingracious.
No, you were super gracious actually. But what I mean is, you know, that's a heist. So it's, you know, with the formula for movies, and it's the same in games, is something's going to go horribly wrong in the middle of it. And so it's like you might encourage them to have backup plans, but you as the GM also have to have backup plans. And you have to, and maybe even give them a really funny out, which is like, you know how I don't know if any of you play any of the Star Wars games, video games, but often if you're walking around as a Jedi, you'll hear the stormtroopers talking about work, and they'll be saying, do you know they've increased how many hours we're working? You know, there's all this kind of, you can build that into, why do castle guards always have to love their sovereign so much? You know,
Shadow of Mordor has orc lumberjacks talking about how woodwork is very similar to war when you really think about it.
Yeah. So it's like this idea, that's something I think a lot about actually, are the NPC, the low-level NPC characters who are wandering around. Like, how satisfied are they with this regime? You know, how easily can they be bribed? Are they willing to look the other way? You know, there are and there are funny dynamics that you could build into a game if you thought about the heist as well. Yes, for some reason, every heist I've attempted to break into, they've been fanatically loyal to the people. So yeah.
We're going to wrap up. I'm going to run through you one last time. I've got one last question.
Okay.
I'm going to start with Neil. Neil, what's the best way you've ever killed a player?
Oh, God.
Chihuahua.
I don't.
I presume that might actually be the best way he's ever killed a character. You proved the whole thing. This is where they were going to get him.
Yeah.
Remember, you're on film.
Yeah.
No, the characters don't tend to die too often in my game, but other horrible things might happen instead. Especially because in the game that I mostly run, Fey Earth, you know, a Fey curse is a lot worse than death.
How kind.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. And there've been a couple of nasty curses on my players. You know, minor things like, you know, withered limbs and the likes that they then have to spend a lot of time and energy to heal and stuff like that. That's been kind of fun. But I get a lot more enjoyment out of killing the NPCs that they've fallen in love with.
Doug, question to you, player or character, what's your favorite kill?
I don't think I'm kind of in that same camp that people don't typically die in the things that I'm running, except Paranoia, which
Everyone dies. It's
everybody dies in all different ways. So
It's wonderful.
it's more the reasons that they die than how they died.
Yeah, how I died.
But a player did describe to me one of these convention campaigns they were running where you have 2 hours and that's it. And so they wanted to die because they had something to get to. And there was this pack of dogs or something. So they let themselves be eaten by the dogs. Even though everybody knew, don't do this thing because the dogs will eat you. But she did it on purpose to be eaten by the dogs. So that's like the most exciting thing I can think of.
Aoibhe, 3 years in, have you gotten any kills yet?
Yes, I have.
Hey!
You know,
Was it vicious and horrible?
but I was more attached to when I killed their favorite NPCs. It's more emotionally damaging. No one cares when their player that they aren't really that invested in gets eaten by a dragon. But when you kill their favorite barkeeper,
Yes.
vicious battle.
That's right. We're seeing the sadism come out now.
That's true. Yep.
Yeah.
The goblin companion dying was far more effective. Yep.
Yeah, one of my players has she's a sorcerer, she has a fairy dragon familiar, and as soon as she got it, everyone was like, Anklegon the Great, this tiny little cat-sized dragon called Anklegon the Great, cannot die.
Yeah.
We will do anything we have to protect this precious little cinnamon bun. They spend more time worrying about the fairy dragon than their own characters.
Arcanel was the fairy dragon I killed. And Maura.
Oh no, I don't actually enjoy killing characters, and but and I haven't actually, but I've really maimed them badly, you know, and put them in really scary situations. I actually had a horror campaign I was running, and a thunderstorm broke out in the middle, actually naturally broke out as we were going through it. And to this day, which is a long time ago, they'll still talk about how terrified they were during this campaign. So that's just a matter of putting them in a certain situation. And when they're, you know, when they're limping out of a place, being pursued by enemies, you know, and maybe someone's unconscious, you know, you can do things like that, but I actually don't really enjoy. It can really fundamentally affect the dynamics between you and the players. I think if it's fair and everybody knows it's fair, you can do this. But yeah, messing with their other characters, their favorites, their sidekicks, things like that can be good. But I also, I'm going to quote, I know another GM and he killed a character in a game in a very stupid way. And the group broke up quite soon afterwards because he was being a bit of an ego guy. You know, he just said you couldn't do anyway, I'm just saying, you have to be careful.
Story there.
Yeah, yeah, I don't want to go into it, but basically, I think you can do it, but it has to be extremely fair that everyone agrees. You know, or it could be very heroic death. That's the other good way to die.
Nobody minds their character dying if it was a hero's death.
Yeah.
Especially if they get to sacrifice heroically.
Yeah, yeah.
People talk about that for years after.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
That can be really great, and I have had a couple of situations in games where things were getting high stakes, and it was like setting it up that like you could sacrifice yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And they managed to do it without that, but they went into knowing, this might be
the one.
But I'll be okay if I go out like this.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we've sacrificed the last of our time. So we're going to call it there.
Going out on a
Ladies and gentlemen, you give a massive round of applause to our fantastic. Thank you all very much.